Okay, I suppose we can start now then. So, right. Good evening, everyone, and good morning from my part, because it is still morning here in the US East Coast where I am. The sun has not come up yet. My name is Juha Uitto, and I have the honor of moderating this session. I am the director of the Independent Evaluation Office of the Global Environment Facility, or the GEF. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this session entitled Transformative Pathways to Food Security, Building Resilience to Climate Change. This session is organized by IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, a UN organization and an international financial institution with a mandate to work with the world's smallholder farmers who produce most of the food consumed in the world today. Smallholder agriculture is also highly vulnerable to the vagaries in climate and even small changes in weather patterns. Therefore, it is logical that IFAD should be concerned about this topic. Most of us will have been alarmed by the latest assessment report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report, which was released just a couple of weeks ago. The messages are not entirely new per se, but the urgency embedded in the findings of the assessment is heightened. Carbon concentrations in the atmosphere are the highest they have ever been in 2 million years, and global temperatures will inevitably continue rising, even under the best-case scenarios in which all countries would adhere to their commitments to the Paris Agreement. And there seems to be scant hope they will. In the past couple of years, we have all felt the consequences in concrete and often dramatic ways. Wildfires have ravaged large swathes of land from Australia to Siberia to the North American West Coast. Heat waves are killing people. China and Europe have this year experienced unprecedented floods. Tropical storms are getting larger and more frequent. Just last week, New Orleans and New York were devastated by Hurricane Ida, proving that not even advanced cities in rich countries are safe from the impacts of climate change. There is, however, a huge environmental justice dimension to all this. Those countries and people who have least contributed to global warming are the ones to bear the brunt of it. These include most developing countries, not least the small island developing countries whose very existence is threatened by rising sea levels. And poor people everywhere, among them small farmers, are the most vulnerable. Enhancing their resilience to climate impacts is imperative while we continue mitigating climate change through emissions reductions. That is what this session is about. We will start with two broader presentations to set the stage in light of evaluative evidence. These will be followed by discussants who bring us views from countries on the front lines, Bangladesh and Ethiopia. You have seen the speakers on the agenda, and I will introduce them further as we get to their part of the program. Each of the speakers will have about 10 minutes to make their point, and I'll do my best to keep them on the straight and narrow. I'll let them know when they have reached their allotted time limits. After each intervention, we'll take 1 or 2 questions for clarification only, and we'll save the substantive comments to discussion period at the end. We should have ample time at that time. Please type your questions into that Q&A section on your screen, and I will monitor the inbox, and I will convey the questions to the panelists. So without further ado, I will pass the microphone to the first speaker, and that will be Dr. Subramanian Nantikesan. also known as Nandi, who is the lead evaluation officer at IFAD, who is also the organizer of the session. Nandi has a long history as an evaluator in the United Nations system. Prior to joining IFAD's Office of Independent Evaluation, he has worked as a senior evaluation and M&E officer and advisor with the UN Population Fund and UNDP, with regional responsibilities in Asia and Africa. A Sri Lankan national, he was educated at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and at Harvard's Kennedy School. He has recently led the thematic evaluation of IFAD's support for small farmers' adaptation to climate change, and I'm sure he'll draw upon that evaluation in his presentation. So over to you, Nanti. You have about 10 minutes to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Juha, and thank you for sharing this. I also want to share Professor Knox's regrets due to a medical situation. He's unable to join us today as planned, but he will be represented by Laura Silici. So I just wanted to make sure that you all know that. I'll try to limit myself to 10 minutes. It may spill over 2 minutes or more. I will seek your advance apologies for that. Thank you again. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Let me begin the presentation by sharing the screen. I don't know how you will let me know, but I suppose if you can't see the screen or see the screen properly, please let me know. Is the screen clear, Juha?
Okay.
Thank you. All right. As you have pointed out, IFAD is about smallholder agriculture. Why are we worried about the smallholder agriculture? That constitutes 75% of world's farms, and it is the source of 80% of the food consumed in the developing countries. So any vulnerability to climate change will result in food insecurity. And Juha has already adequately elaborated on how the smallholder farmers are disproportionately affected by climate change that we all face. The part that we are trying to argue here is if we want to improve the smallholder resilience, we need to have an evidence base, and evidence base comes from evaluations. And this evidence base can provide agricultural solutions to smallholders, as well as governments to improve their support to encourage smallholder farmers to pursue adaptive pathways. So first thing that we recognize is the agricultural sector is impacted by climate change, as we said now, but it is also contributing to climate change by greenhouse emissions and other ways in which it could impact on the ecosystems. So the important part of any climate adaptation solution is it at least does no harm to the ecosystem, preferably better than that, and try to restore degraded natural systems. The second part to recognize is that 2030 agenda is 8 years away. In IFAD language, this is less than 1.5 project cycles away. Plus, IPCC has already warned us that unless we take urgent action, we are in for drastic consequences, irreversible drastic consequences. So the point is that it is not just enough to have effective climate adaptation solutions. We should aim for transformative adaptive solutions, and evaluations and other research should point out to a body of such transformative solutions. Third part is that many governments are facing significant challenges to incentivize sustainable climate change adaptation response. The CCA, if you are seeing that, it stands for climate change adaptation. So the climate change adaptation response is a challenge. The challenges are twofold. One is finances. Are there adequate finances? UNEP estimates in the last adaptation gap report, we would need about $70 billion per year, which is likely to expand as we go along. So do we have enough finances, and do we have the knowledge base of transformative and effective solutions to build climate resilience. So if you have to do evaluations, and as we did one just recently, it is about to be, it has been submitted to a board approval. We face at least 3 challenges, which are weighty enough. First is that in many cases, almost in all situations, climate change is context specific. You could have a drought in Sahel region and a flood-prone climate in Bangladesh. So these are completely different, draws completely different adaptive responses. And how do we characterize, how do we measure the resilience as a result of these diverse kind of threats that we face? So in our, when we started the evaluation, we thought we had a results framework, but turned out that we didn't have one because the conceptual framework or the results that we had were not quite there yet. So it has to be a goal-free evaluation. And there is another reason for this. We have to worry about the sustainability of the interventions as well, which means that whether you design for sustainability or not, we have to make sure that the climate adaptive solutions are sustainable. They are not harming the ecosystems. And therefore, you have to look at not only intended consequences, but also you have to look at unintended consequences of your action. The second part, evaluation challenge is that usually you have a project, you have poverty, you want to reduce poverty, you put in a anti-poverty project. But in the case of climate change and climate threats, what you are facing is actually a risk, not a situation that has materialized, but you are facing a likelihood of the threat intensifying in frequency or intensifying in magnitude and so on and so forth. So the fact that that is projected doesn't mean that it has happened. But at the same time, you have to build a resilience response and show that the resilience response is sufficient to address the threat. So how do we do this? Now, one of the things that we can do is we also identify countries where the threats have actually materialized. Honduras, there was a cyclone. Bangladesh, there was a coastal flood, and so on and so forth. And then in that condition, you check whether the climate adaptive solution has worked or not. And so that is one of the ways in which you address the threat. The third part is a systemic approach is needed. What do we mean by this? Now, climate resilience cannot be seen in a silo. If smallholders are able to withstand the climate threat, that is because of several preconditions existed when the threat materialized. They should have sufficient asset base. If they didn't have sufficient asset base, the moment the crisis hits them, they may have to sell off the assets, and that is a coping strategy, but nevertheless is a negative coping strategy, not something that we are hoping for. So initial conditions matter, different economic resilience matters, social conditions matter, how much social support they have, community support they have to take risks and withstand the shocks and so on and so forth. So climate resilience is an interdependent entity which depends on other factors as well, within the community, within the state, what kind of safety nets are there, number of things. So you can't see climate resilience in isolation. The other part is the scale at which you are looking at. IFAD's projects cover not a large area. So farm level or community level is not the level at which ecosystems can be, your consequences to ecosystems can be understood or analyzed. You have to have landscape level situations. So you have to have a particular scale at which you have to look at project level alone. IFAD size project level alone is not sufficient to address this thing. So we move on to what we evaluated. Our evaluation had 2 evaluants. One is to look at what difference did IFAD make to smallholder agriculture and climate change adaptation. And the second part is, are we prepared to do this going forward? Are we prepared to address the escalating climate threats and so on and so forth? Now, 2 bookkeeping things I want to address now. The evaluation was conducted during a COVID pandemic situation. So there were a number of precautions that we have to take, number of steps that we have to take. And I will identify some of them. First of all, you have to rely on, because international travel is not allowed, often we had to rely on local consultants if their pandemic situation permitted to go and interview beneficiaries and site visits and so on. Otherwise, we conducted virtual interviews. Over 700 people were interviewed as a part of this evaluation. And we also had in-country advisors to validate the findings and check if the findings of the evaluations are appropriate. Secondary evidence was also collected, and we will come to that in the next presentation, rapid evidence assessment from a scan of literature that is available on how climate adaptation was dealt with globally. And finally, the geospatial information, wherever that was available, was also used for our evaluation. So the sources of primary evidence would be case studies conducted in 20 countries, covering 34 projects of 14% of IFAD's portfolio. And each case study had learning themes built in, which looked at scaling up, knowledge management, and how sustainable the adaptation responses are, looking at ecosystem, human system interactions. And the third part is online surveys of staff. 238 staff members responded. So I beg your pardon. There was also document review, as well as geospatial information and rapid evidence assessment. So let me move on to the results quickly. I'll not present the entire results, but results that are relevant to general public. And there are two parts that I want to address on. One is scaling up, the other is sustainability. So scaling up, what we found was about a quarter of IFAD's projects are likely to be scaled up or have been scaled up. And if you analyze these things, the success is not a surprise, it's the usual things. The first and foremost thing is the ownership of the government to climate adaptation responses and to the ideas that are presented there. This is usually supported by a cocktail of partnerships, high-profile strategic partnerships that are necessary to persuade the government as well as the farmers to pursue broad level scale up the results and the interventions. And finally, we have to think through from the beginning at the design stage itself, how we plan to scale up, what will be needed, whether we are doing those things. The sustainability of climate adaptation responses, we have a spectrum. It is not a this or that, was it there or not, as clearly you can imagine. It covered a spectrum. The highest end of the spectrum, where none match that ideal standard, is to restore the degraded natural systems around them. And the worst end of the spectrum is you recognize that there is a climate change, but you don't do anything. You know that agriculture affects the climate change adversely, but you don't provide any offsets. You don't think of offsets to counter that. So in between, these things, the cases, most of the cases are in between. And on the IFAD's ideal is to do no harm or do better than do no harm. A quarter of the case studies, again, fared within this region. They did no harm, or if they did harm, they provided enough offsets to counter the kind of harm that is being done. You will, in the question and answer, ask how did we determine this and all, and we will be happy to answer that at this stage. And the remaining majority of them are at different stages of successfully thinking through and designing or providing offsets to counter the harm that they are doing. So this is roughly the spectrum, and the challenge is to be able to go beyond do no harm and make sure that we restore the environment. How do we do that will be one of the things that the evaluation explored. So way forward, first thing that we need is a conceptual framework to understand what in that context we mean by smallholder resilience. We need to have results focus of the intervention, what we are trying to improve, and whether we can identify whether the resilience is improving or not when the climate threat happens, whether it is being able to meet those crises or not. And the part is, unless you have a solid framework, you would not know whether we are making a difference. And the difference comes through promoting win-win solutions, as we call it. It is providing not only climate adaptation solutions, but also climate adaptation solutions that are sustainable, that are not harming the ecosystems and fixing the ecosystems. At the same time, third part, they also provide economic viability, economic resilience. So these are some solutions we identified as actually not everywhere it is possible, but to the extent possible, we have to identify solutions. To do this, we have to have the right capacities at the right time, at the right place from all corners. It could be the development actors, smallholder organizations, it could be and most importantly, the government and different levels of government that provide services to support the climate adaptation effort. And these capacities need to work with knowledge, appropriate and adequate knowledge to deal with climate change. We need the partnerships to scale up, to make sure that this happens at scale. You experiment, try whether it works, and then scale up to see how far you can take it. All those things rely on a learning culture to be able to learn from your experience, monitor, track, see what lessons you can learn, and then try to adaptively manage to that. I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention, and over to you, Ha.
Thank you very much, Nanti. I decided not to remind you at the 10-minute mark. Very interesting, and I just note the fact that you, when you use the term sustainability of these interventions, you're not talking about the depth criteria of the continuation of the intervention itself. You actually talk about the sustainability of these actions in terms of their climate and environmental sustainability, and that's an important distinction that I would like to draw to everybody's attention.
Thank you so much for highlighting.
There were no clarifying questions to you, but whereas Inge Miranda made the pertinent observation in the question and answer, that sadly most countries yet formulate proper agricultural policy of incorporate the potential climate issues with related to small farmers, but then addressing macro farmers, which I think is probably correct. So I think we can move on to Laura, who to me is not a substitute or representing Jerry Knox, but this is actually a co-author of this paper on that we will hear about. And so Laura Silici will talk about transformational adaptation in smallholder farming, insights from a rapid evidence assessment. And she is an environmental economist with expertise in sustainable natural resource management and agricultural innovation. She used to be a researcher in the agroecology team at the International Institute for Environment and Development, IIED, in London. But now she works as a research consultant to development and research institutions. So over to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Juha. I'm going to share my screen right now.
Yeah.
So yes, as you introduced and has Nanti also mentioned in his presentation, I'm going to discuss the results of a rapid evidence assessment that was commissioned by IFAD, the Independent Office of Evaluation, as part of the thematic evaluation whose results Nanti just discussed to you. The objective of the assessment was to assess what interventions globally have helped smallholders building their adaptive capacity, and understand how the lessons from these interventions were transferred through 3 learning domains that are very important to transformational change. And these are scaling up, knowledge management, and the human ecosystem nexus. For those who are not very familiar with the approach, a rapid evidence assessment is very similar to a systematic review of the literature, but is more focused on a very specific and explicit research question. It follows very strict guidelines in the selection of the sources, in the extraction of the data, and in the analysis of the evidence. In our case, when we first queried the different search databases, we got more than 800 results. So we then screened these titles for relevance, and we ended up analyzing into deeper detail 91 full-text publications that provided the evidence base for our synthesis report, for the narrative synthesis. Coming to the results, with regard to scaling up, the evidence shows that knowledge and access to information are the most important determinants of farmers' decision to pursue adaptation. But awareness alone does not trigger change, does not prompt action. So other enabling factors must exist, and these may be physical assets, economic wealth, but also soft assets like skills, education, or institutional support from groups and organizations. So the role for policy is to ensure that all these conditions exist and so complement the autonomous adaptation initiatives, the individual initiatives, with planned adaptation at higher level. Understanding these existing conditions is very important for policymakers and researchers, also to make sure that they understand how smallholders and different groups of smallholders actually react to change and variability, and to make sure that the solutions that they promote may not create or increase existing inequalities. For instance, if technical improvements or communications approach are promoted that exclude some groups, they may actually reiterate existing disparities embedded in gender or income. Another outcome of the evidence analysis is that we can identify some recurrent characteristics of interventions that were successful in supporting scaling up adaptation. And these are interventions that usually cut across different sectors, take on participatory approaches in planning and implementation, and also provide spaces for knowledge exchange and co-creation. And indeed, knowledge management is a critical element in policies and interventions that aim to secure transformative adaptation pathways that are equitable and persistent over time. In this process, indigenous knowledge is very fundamentally important because it draws on the deep understanding of the local context. But at the same time, farmers' local knowledge relies on past experiences. That means that it usually prompts reactive actions and may not be able to consider future threats. This is why it is important to bridge this local knowledge with external scientific knowledge. It is important on one hand to widen farmers' knowledge base and allow them to uptake more proactive or forward-looking attitudes. But on the other hand, it's also important to help scientists and policymakers understand better farmers' needs and what is feasible at local level. Social learning provides an effective tool to bring together and bridge different types of knowledge. A notable example of social learning is probably Farmers Field School, but also more recently we have a more innovative example of learning platforms where different types of stakeholders are brought together, and the social learning is facilitated usually by civil society groups or development research organizations. Social learning and social networks appear to be very important also in supporting farmers in uptaking landscape management approaches and ecosystem-based adaptation. And this is because collective action helps facilitate the exchange and the transfer of complex skills and complex knowledge through peer-to-peer learning, but also because it makes it easier to manage and use common pool resources. Also in this case, however, the evidence shows that a higher level framework is needed to preserve and amplify the results and the outcomes achieved at individual and community level over time. This can be done, for instance, when government build infrastructure for watershed management or land reclamation, or when it provides economic incentives in the forms of payments for ecosystem services. A higher level framework, when dealing with agriculture and environment, a higher level framework is also needed to monitor and solve possible trade-offs arising, for instance, from competing uses of the land or between groups engaged in different economic activities. And to do so, the literature highlights how important it is that policies, but also research and monitoring and evaluation really break the silos that now exist between agriculture and other intervention sectors. And in particular, agriculture alongside climate change, natural resource management and energy must really be integrated in a unique policy vision where different objectives and goals are weighted and mediated. Another important implication for policy and research is that the landscape dimension should become the unit of the analysis, really. And this is because the complex interactions existing between the human system and the ecosystem happen at the landscape level, beyond the limit of the farm and beyond the administrative boundaries of the village or the district. So I finish by discussing the few most important policy implications from our discussion today. So the first one is that transformational change, transformational adaptation must rely on the strong complementarity and the consistent sound integration of both autonomous individual initiatives and planned adaptation strategies. Policymakers and development actors play a key role in this process by ensuring the political vision, the political leadership, by providing the right incentives and by facilitating participatory approaches. Also, international organizations and civil society play a role, and a very important role for them to play is to mainstream innovation as knowledge brokers and as facilitators of learning platforms and stakeholders partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is very seldom I'm timing these things. Your presentation was 10 minutes and 5 seconds. Amazing. But to the point and very interesting, truly. I think we can move straight to the from these higher macro level presentations to the field and to the concrete cases from the countries. And I would then like to ask, we have two very prominent panelists now. So first I would like to ask Sheikh Mohammed Mohsin to start. He is the additional chief engineer for planning, design and research at local government engineering department under the Local Government Division of Ministry of Local Government, Rural Development and Cooperatives in Bangladesh. He has worked in the department since 1988 and has 32 years of experience as an executive engineer, project director, superintending, and additional chief engineer at various levels. And he has actually been a project director of IFAD financed Sunamgam community-based resource management project and was awarded the first IFAD Gender Award for the Asia Pacific region in 2013. He now contributes at policy level to many government of Bangladesh projects with international development partners. He was educated at the universities in Dhaka and in Birmingham, UK, and has master's degrees in geotechnical engineering and construction management. So, Mr. Mohsin, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy, and it's a great honor to me, actually, having a part of this discussion with today's actually session. I am very happy to actually share the initiatives of our department and as well as the government policy level initiatives. And as actually I have a long experience in the field, so, and even I work for the community level, even for 17 years in the field level. So from my experience, mostly I will share with you about the climate change vulnerabilities and the actually environmental degradations results actually that we are now taking challenge. The government of Bangladesh actually has integrated environmental degradations and the climate changes in the actually the medium-term planning process and identified specific objectives and strategies for environmental protections and climate changes. So it's actually long-term actually challenges, and Bangladesh actually participated global level all the climate change forums and is a signatory to all related global action programs. You know that I just want to give a small location, the geographical location of Bangladesh actually. If you see in the map, it is in the Southeast Asian region, and it is it is in the pocket of our India, the biggest country surrounding Bangladesh is India, and in the top Nepal and Bhutan. And in the upper part of Bangladesh actually the very hilly areas, and we are very close to the Bay of Bengal. So Bangladesh is carrying huge environmental actually challenges, especially the frequent flood and frequent actually the long-term rainfall and intensities, all actually the water from the upper part, it is going through Bangladesh to Bay of Bengal. In the surroundings, we have a lot of international rivers, and so it is the location of Bangladesh in a really risk position in the context of climate changes and environmental degradations process. Many laws and regulations already government enacted by by this time. And we, following those long-term planning process in the government, perspectives plans and other things, government segregated it in as different short-term planning, like now we are going to 5 years plan. What is the actually the long target is our perspectives plan 2041. So we have to have actually even committed for the SDG goals also. And in this way, government is planning nationally and internationally. Actually, we are our hand is open to actually act with these global actually challenges we have to meet, especially our farmers. Mainly our economy is based on the agriculture, and long time actually people are working here in the in Bangladesh. There is not fully equipped farming system. Mostly we are gradually coming from manual to mechanized farming system. So in this way, with additional challenges with climate change issues become more vulnerable for the smallholders farmers. So, you know, we are, it is still, we are suffering from our water pollution, even air pollution, even the forest reserve, the thing actually it is not yet up to the mark. We have to work long for this thing. Even though actually we government has taken lot of initiatives, and these initiatives are mainly we can say the perspectives plan for Bangladesh 2021 to 2041, Bangladesh Delta Plan to 2100, and even the 5 years plan and other we have climate changes strategy and action plan 2009, and a lot of other plan government actually enacted here. In the Delta plan, government actually zoning our whole country in 6 zoning area, like coastal zone, drought-prone areas, Howard and flash flood area, and Chittagong hill tracts area, river system and tributaries, and urban areas. So in this zoning system, we have to have a different nature of the initiatives or different kind of intervention for the infrastructure, for the rural infrastructure, for urban infrastructure, and even for the livelihood of the rural people. So now I am coming to the point of actually what LGED, my department, under the local government engineering department, what actually it is contributing for the climate change issues to adopt something in our country. You know, in the coastal area, we have about 19 districts, sub-districts, 19 districts are here, and a lot of government initiatives as well as the partner organization like IFAD, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, they are actually taking part in the initiating the projects to the Bangladesh. And the nature of the projects is like that. For the road work, I think we have to change our design in the context of the climate change vulnerabilities consideration. We have to change the geometrical design, and as well as the height of the embankments, and also to protect it, we have to use some time considering the actually severity of the issues. We have to use the biological protection to even hard protective works we have to take, and it costs huge actually cost related issues. So we have to raise our markets, we have to build our strong design, we have to initiate it for the market and market connecting roads also, and we have to do for the farmers to actually ensure their productivity, to have the exact value of their production they can ensure even with these climate vulnerabilities we have. So the nice thing actually, I should say, IFAD is contributing in our country from long time. Actually, we have a lot of projects from early 2000, by 2000, the project that I was, it was started in 2001, but even 1970s or 80s, we have a lot of projects from IFAD. And the intervention of the IFAD project is why it is actually important, and to actually share with you that it has doing the intervention for the community infrastructure that actually connecting the smallholders household to the actually farmers and to the market and national network. And we have to have invest in the natural resource management. They gave the access to the fishers communities to the natural resource, public natural resource, and we invest in the market infrastructures. And the separate thing we always encourage for the women, smallholders, women actually farmers, we initiated for this. And with all these things, we have to have the protective activities. And these protective activities, sometimes it takes actually biological protection, protective measures, or sometimes a hard engineering actually solution we have to do. The good thing is that in IFAD, we always try to engage the research institute with the agricultural research institute to the extension department. So the agriculture research results can actually disseminate directly to the farmers to have the increase their productivity, actually manage the risk, and the other issues, new technology, they can actually have the ideas for that. And now we have in the two projects of IFAD, we have seen that early warning system. Sometimes you see that in our country, the flooding is very frequent, and sometimes we have seen in the our area, the crops, we cannot have total harvesting. The farmers are not getting the total harvesting period. So in that case, they initiate for the actually early varieties. Varieties we have to introduce to the farmers, as well as the early warning system they have to introduce, that farmers can understand earlier the risk of the actually floodings and other things. So these are actually initiatives taking throughout the country, but I should say it is not enough. And the sustainability, if we say for the sustainability of this, all the intervention we have to do long, we have to move forward long way actually. The people even in our country, some baseline surveys and all the other survey studies say that the people, even within 2 years, they have to move 3 times from their own household due to the flooding. They lost their house even because the erosion of the river and the degradations of the land. So these are actually happening frequently, and it is clear to us that we are in a crisis situation. So even we have the huge human resources. We have, about 17 crore people. We are living in a small country. Even the government initiative is always promoting for the people and for the farmers, but we have to do a lot of things for the small farmers. I should say we are not actually even the COVID situation. The people become more vulnerable. Most of the people, they lose their job, and when the lockdown happened, the farmers' production, they are not getting the real price for their production. Even we have to do a lot of things for the natural resource management. I should say we have a scope to do a lot of things here, and some insurance for the livestock and for the fishery sectors. We have to do more, I should say. Thank you very much, and thanks to all.
Thanks very much for highlighting all the very complex interlinkages here, and how environment and natural resources management and climate change are ever present in the Bangladeshi situation. Okay, let's move to our last, but certainly not least presenter today. We have His Excellency Mr. Sani Reddy Ahmed, who is State Minister for Agriculture in Ethiopia, who has a lengthy history in the sector. And I know that he has, for example, served as Director General of the Ethiopian Coffee and Tea Development and Marketing Authority in the past, and knows the agriculture sector in Ethiopia very, very well. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I am very happy by being this part of this globally important session. We Ethiopians understand where we are. We are in Africa and we are in East Africa. As all of you know, climate change mainly impacts the population of developing countries, particularly Africa. It is because of they have dependence of natural resource and lack of means to cope up with impact of climate change. When we come to Ethiopia, we are agrarian economy. We are agrarian and our economy is agrarian economy. When we look into Ethiopian economy, agriculture contributes 32.7% of GDP now this year. Again, 90% of food comes from agriculture and forestry sector. Agriculture contributes 80% of foreign earning. Agriculture engage 80% of our population livelihood depend on agriculture. Even other sectors like service and industry depend on agriculture for their service market and for their raw material. When we mean agriculture in Ethiopia, it is 95% depend on smallholder farming. The land belonging to smallholder farmer is almost 95%. Agricultural products comes from smallholder farmer, more than 90%. When we mean agriculture, we are just talking about smallholder farmer. The impact of climate change in Ethiopian agriculture, as agriculture is sensitive to fluctuation of temperature and rainfall reception. The effect, when we see the effect, the erratic and the variable rainfall, that means less and high rain, which is not suitable for cropping or grazing. High temperature, frequent drought and flood. Those impacts decrease in our production and productivity, increase agricultural food price time to time, outbreak of diseases like malaria, waterborne disease, respiratory disease, land degradation, deforestation, water depletion and pollution, damage of infrastructure that we build for irrigation or road or other agricultural infrastructures. Again, food security and hunger is a character of our agricultural sector in Ethiopia. Based on that, our government work a lot on to change the situation. As you know, we contribute, as Ethiopia contributes in the global climate change conference, sessions, agreements. When we look into the past evidence that the climate change affect our economy and our agriculture, Ethiopia affected by climate change, droughts occurred in 1958, 1965, 1973, 1984, 1992, 2002, 2006, 2010, and 2011. In those most cases, our smallholder farmers affected by the climate change. Again, it endangers food security, the availability and access to pasture in the livestock sector. On those basic evidence-based remedies are important to our agriculture. Our government believes that coordinated and integrated means of remedies are important to agriculture. That means integrated mitigation and adaptation measures are important to Ethiopian agriculture, especially for smallholder farmers. Based on that, the reason for that agriculture affected by climate change is that our Ethiopian agriculture mainly depend on rain-fed farming system and natural resource-based commodity, which are mostly vulnerable to climate change. As I mentioned, 95% of our agriculture depend on smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers have a limitation on climate information and knowledge. Our smallholder farmers are not accessible to finance and technology, which is compatible to climate change. Institutional capacity problems at federal and regional level, at all levels, lack of adequate irrigation facilities and water application technologies. Even sometimes furrow irrigation brings salinity to our soil. policy-related problems that especially the macro and the microfinance related issues. But by now we are on the way to resolve it because our government developed financial reform and ratify financial policy. There are also specific socio-technical and social barriers like limited understanding and lagging behind to use agrometeorological informations, technologies that help to reduce climate shocks. Again, limited understanding and access to climate risk transferring mechanisms like insurance. Based on that, our government creates clear vision that specify climate change is build a climate resilient green economy by 2025. The economy with middle income, resilient to negative impact of climate change, and achieve with no net increase in greenhouse gas emission. To achieve this vision, we have developed and every time update our agricultural policy, already ratified and implement a green economy strategy launched November 2021. Again, climate resilient strategy for agriculture, sector specific. Again, program of adaptation to climate change and many rules and regulations try to address the climate change issues. We have already identified 41 key most promising options that we take a measure in agriculture sector. Based on that, the vision aims to provide Ethiopians with a common goal and a roadmap for achieving climate resilient green economy. Based on this strategy, the measures that taken by the government focus given to agricultural production and productivity, especially focus given to extension service that address information and knowledge to smallholder farmers through different mechanisms like farmer field school, research, extension farmer linkage, interactive, many means. Again, promote and demonstrate different climate change activities, giving due attention to capacity building of the research to generate 32 agroecologic based technologies that's most suited to those 32 agroecologies. Give attention to irrigation infrastructure through federal and regional governments, through partners like IFAD, World Bank, GIZ, and local NGOs. Gradually, we move to expand irrigation instead of depending fully on that erratic rain. Again, the government leave tax exemption, already tax exempted all the agricultural related inputs and the machineries, whether it's chemical, biological, and mechanical. Especially the tax exemption favor to biofertilizers that promote intensive farming and reduce livestock using for plowing purpose. Government encourage marketing and agribusiness linkage through the private and cooperatives. Again, government encourage private sector to invest in agriculture. Establish integrated agro-industrial parks to create access, market access to smallholder farmer in 14 different agroecological zones. The National Green Legacy of the Prime Minister Initiative 2019, it is under implementation. That means 20 billion trees within 4 years through mobilization of the community. The intention is that afforestation and agroafforestation, improving ground and surface water to irrigation, reduce soil erosion, soil acidity and salinity. It improves also soil fertility. Up to now, within 3 years, we have planted around 70.4 billion. 25% of this seedling is fruit trees to ensure our food security and improve our export generation. Still, there is a challenge of the government in general and smallholders in particular. Limited resource mobilization. Resource mobilization capacity is limited. We need 316 billion USD for 10 years. Still, we have got only around 25%. Need to improve information access and knowledge to smallholder farmers to transfer new technologies. Again, we have a limited access and adaptation capacity to improve existing climate smart technologies. We still have a capacity problem, human, organizational structure, and technological capacity like IT. Finally, the government of Ethiopia has shown its commitment to transforming its development path from conventional to green growth path. It represents the ambition to achieve economic development targets by using resource-efficient ways that overcomes the possible conflict between economic growth and fighting climate change. The government building green economy should result in the creation of competitive advantage out of a focus on the sustainable use of resource and higher productivity growth to attain transformational change. In our due process, the contribution of IFAD, we recognize, our smallholder farmers recognize, that enable us to build smallholder farmers resilient capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope I unmuted myself. Very interesting again. So let's move to discussion here now. We don't have very many questions here. In addition to the one that I already read in between here, we had Aman Ali from World Fish, who was posing a question in the Q&A on complicated and complex working relationships with the government in a conflict-affected countries like Myanmar and Afghanistan, where the international community do not accept the current setup. And how can we ensure scaling up through government ownership in such situations? And I see that Nanti has already written some comments here, but maybe you could say a few words to both of these questions in public here, if you don't mind.
Sure. Both questions are very, very pertinent, and the practical reality reflects the fact behind that. Scaling up, I agree with the point that is being raised. It's not always the government. There may be situations where the government may not be actually in a position to prioritize climate change compared to other competing priorities, the resource issue. Or it could be lack of awareness or other factors that contribute to that. So the central government may not be on board. But at the same time, you can find different levels at which there is support from the government. It could be municipality level, for instance. In Bolivia, we encountered a situation where there may not be full support from the central government, but at the municipality level, there were a lot of action that was going on. We had these talking maps. It's a very established practice. Got picked up by municipalities, and then they were also using it for not only climate adaptive solutions to identify climate development related development issues and solutions, but they were using it for other development solutions, not only in the 15 municipalities that IFAD was dealing with, but all of the other 57 municipalities or so that were there outside. So not all of them, but many of them pursued those things. So different level of government is one. And then the other thing is different actors could pick up the and use the results or the interventions. I do not know, you may know the history of this better, but let us take farmer field schools. It may have originated with one UN agency, FAO, I don't know. That could be the possibility, but then it is now spread everywhere, and different actors support this, and IFAD supports it now, and I've seen other development donors supporting the farm field schools. And it is not only now in farm field schools, are not only in crop technology and so on, but they are also extended to livestock sector, for instance, in Rwanda. We saw that happening there. So there is this kind of picking up and carrying the ball at different levels by different actors and things like that. And the important point that you raise is, it is not just a simple blueprint. This is the way to go. You try everything at your disposal to make sure that things happen things get picked up. So that is the bottom line. Different actors, different levels of government, go for them. The other part of the, if you could remind me the second question that was there.
Was about the conflict situations.
So this is the conflict situation in which the scaling up is done. There was a second question that was asked.
Oh, the first one was about this focus on more on the large scale farmers in policies.
It came to me in the reverse order. Yes, there is a preoccupation by many to focus on large scale farming and so on. Partly there is a belief that if you do it at scale, then you reach your food security faster, it is more efficient, it is more productive, and therefore it is likely to give you better results faster. So if you have only limited resources, don't waste it, quote unquote, don't waste it on small scale subsistence level economies, but rather go for a commercial scale and push it further. I'm not an expert, so I can't comment on that. But at the same time, one of the things that we recognize in general is that we do not internalize, or we do not account for the externalities, or we think of those as externalities. What is the cost to ecosystems? What is actually the efficiency of the system? These kind of measurements are need to be re-evaluated carefully. There was a good publication recently on livestock, where they argued that the whole premise that commercialized livestock dairy industry is the way to go, and they were arguing, they're categorizing, tabulating the actual costs involved, social, economic, and ecosystem costs involved in pursuing that. And then they show alternatives of small or medium scale livestock farms, how they are able to integrate and able to produce comparatively at equal efficiency defined in a particular way, and making sure that there are no minimizing the externalities to ecosystems, as well as minimize the greenhouse gases, as well as improving the soil quality and so on and so forth. We can discuss that at length if you wish. I'll stop there. But the point is, there is a belief, and it is not fully justified always. There are cases where you will find that a smaller scale is better off, yields you better results than, or at least as good a result as the large scale one with less damage attended. Over. Thank you.
While waiting for some questions from the audience, so I have a bit of a quite related question, and especially to our government representatives, and this is a concrete issue that we deal with in the Global Environment Facility, for example. We've heard both from Ethiopia and from Bangladesh how the environmental issues are really central to natural resources management issues are really central to all production systems, basically. Still, we, for example, in the GEF, our normal counterpart in countries is the Ministry of Environment. And as we know, the ministries of environment may not always be the most central or powerful ministries, and we struggle with the issues that the policy reforms and the programs that we deal with might be undone by so-called productive line policies, for example, be it agriculture or industry or something else. So how do we convince the ministries of finance and ministries of planning and so on that there is a need for a policy coherence that takes into account the environment and climate concerns and sustainable natural resources management in all sectors, that it's not something separate. The environment is not an externality, but it is essential for the whole development policy. And I'm asking both of our government representatives here on what your views would be on this issue. Who would like to start? Yeah, Sunny, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I think when we speak about and deal about climate change, we can't speak and deal without environment. In Ethiopia, Environment, Forest and the Climate Change Commission is playing its role actively in any project, whether it's government or not. The environment issue as a safeguard addressed. I think by now, the commission influencing not only the Minister of Finance, influencing the Prime Minister. That's why 20 billion seedling within 4 years initiative is declared by the Prime Minister to afforestation and agroforestation, that the Commission take as entry point to develop our soil and water and enable us to capacitate our resilience to climate change. I think you know we have National Soil and Water Conservation Program. We have afforestation and agroafforestation program. As I said, in every project implementation, the environment assessment and appraisal, giving an attention. even one of the important evaluation points from the planning ministry. In our country, the planning is not a commission, it is a ministry, planning and development ministry, regulates with collaboration with the commission. Thank you very much.
Very good, very good.
Okay.
Yeah, Mohsin, did you?
Yes. I think it is the almost that I have seen from the Mr. Sani's briefing. In our country, government actually amended a lot of actually acts. Recently, the Environment Conservation Act, National Environment Policy 2018, and Conservation Act, it is amended latest 2010 actually. Even every project, when we are the planning commission, they are approving the highest His Excellency, Honorable Prime Minister, and actually approved it through ACME. So we have to go some way to have the environmental clearance. Well, either it is the infrastructural project or it is the other health or education or even the other project. We have to follow the national environmental policy 2018, and that actually we have to the latest some compliance we have to follow. It creates a lot of change in our country. Sometimes, if I give the example, like the waterway, when we construct the bridges, we have to have the hydrological and morphological study, and we have to have clearance from the Ministry of Environment, and then we have to go ahead for the implementations of those projects. So environment is actually its role is playing vitally in our country. Even for the industrial waste management, even the urban sector, the waste management, we have to follow the environmental clearance, and we have to work a lot actually. Even we have the policy and the compliance, even the country is small, we have huge population, we have to fight with the actually economy, and now the COVID-19 situation. So we have to the policy and the acts actually we have, but still we have to work to motivate our people, motivate our business authorities, motivate our other stakeholders of the country. That's what we have to do in our country. I think this is in nutshell with you asking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm very glad to hear these examples. They are very progressive. Here we have another direct question to Laura regarding, Laura, did you come across with a successful example of a country or region where we have a well-functioning learning platform based on your literature review? If yes, what are some of the key parameters of that platform?
Oh yeah, thank you. That's quite interesting because it was one also of the topics that I think was one of the most interesting part, the one of knowledge management. And yes, one example or one of two examples that came to my mind, are from a learning platform organized by a CGR center in Peru, the International Potato Center. It was a project that was initiated and mediated by the International Institute for Environment and Development, but was then implemented by the CGR Center together with local associations of farmers. And I think one of the key parameters for the success of that case, for instance, were first of all, the really peer-to-peer learning position between scientists and farmers. And that was thanks to the role of a third organization as facilitator. So the scientists were able to pose themselves in a learner position, which is not sometimes easy to achieve. And the farmers also on their side overcome maybe the mistrust or the misunderstanding that might exist, especially in terms of expectations, time frame. So in that case, the facilitation role of a third organization was key to facilitate the peer-to-peer learning. And the other important aspect was the institutional aspect. So all the partnerships that were initiated between the farmers groups and the research center were somehow legalized under a legal framework, so that, for instance, some indigenous varieties of seeds and seedlings were patented under the CGR under the CGR Seeds Bank, and ensuring the farmer that their research effort, their field research effort was recognized and protected, but at the same time without opening up to speculation. So the institutional aspects, legal aspects are very important, securing the research outcomes and the facilitation. These are, I think, the two most important aspects. And similar examples we found also in Kenya, or in in a Pan-African Asian project, which was funded by the EU and implemented by Caritas, where field experimentations were at the basis of the innovation.
Thank you very much. It's good to find good cases. I think we have more or less exhausted our time. We have one more comment or question here from Shah. Most countries are demonstrating a gap in their agricultural policies and frameworks, lack of some somewhat potential mechanisms to overcome environmental issues, especially on small farmers. Could IFAD have any engagement? I think we have approximately one minute left in our session, so maybe Nanti, you as the organizer, you can use this opportunity to close this session at the same time.
Oblique answer to this. UNEP tracks down how many countries are following their nationally determined contributions, and they found that 72% of the countries are following the nationally determined contributions, and 9% have absolutely no tracking or doing anything about that. IFAD is engaged in one of the primary motives of IFAD's engagement at the country level is to support the nationally determined contributions. All the country strategies have to involve and identify national development strategies, gaps, and they support that. So that is the only small way in which IFAD supports the gap that you are identifying. It's not the full gap, it's part of that gap. We recognize that. Over.
So I believe we have exhausted our time, and I suspect that we are being cut off. So thank you very much for everybody participating, and it's been very interesting, and I'm sure that there will be a recording available later, and we will continue this discussion later.
Thank you so much again.
We have not been cut off, and we will not be cut off, but let's respect the time limits. So yeah, thank you to all participants and panelists and everybody who stayed in the audience for the whole time and participated. Thanks so much.
Thank you
very
again
much.
for sharing.
Bye. Bye-bye.
We are happy.
There is a poll that we need to respond to.
Right, there is a post-session poll, so please rate us.
It says hosts and panelists cannot vote.
We can't.
That is a pity. That is a pity. Five positive
Bye,
votes lost.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye. Thanks.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, Reddy and Shay. Thank you so much. And
Thank you very
thank you for moderating this.
Bye.
Much appreciated. All right. All right. Okay. So,
Okay.
so are you? So let us. I will call you. If you,
Sorry?
you have a minute after this, or you have to jump to a meeting at.
No. Yeah. Do you wanna do Skype or something?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'll be here.